Hi, everyone. I'm Cathie Mahon, the President and CEO of Inclusiv, and I have the great honor and privilege to be joined today by Robert Smith, founder, chairman, and CEO of private equity firm Vista Equity Partners. Now, many of you will know of Mr. Smith as one of the most successful businessmen and investors in the country, with a large portfolio of businesses consisting of many of the country's leading technology firms, including Finastra, a firm known to many credit unions. But many of us are also coming to know Mr. Smith in recent years because of his philanthropy, his impact investing, and his activist role within the business community, leading the charge for getting corporations and government to come together and work on bridging the racial wealth divide. Welcome, Robert. It's so great to see you, and I'm so looking forward to this chat. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you for inviting me, and I want to thank you and your members for all the work that you do every day to really make a more economically inclusive economy. So, thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you. So to kick us off, Robert, I have to say I was fascinated to, as I was sort of digging into your background, to learn about that you really started out as a chemical engineer. And I'd just love to hear a little bit about your personal pathway coming from chemical engineering to really being such a leading investor in finance and technology.
Yeah, thank you. I'll make this kind of a short pathway, but I find it the work, like all things that you do as an undergraduate and early on, starts to inform how you think about the world. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, fourth generation from there. Parents were school teachers, and really wasn't exposed to engineering or banking or finance or investing or anything of that sort. Grew up in a segregated neighborhood, in essence, at the dawn of desegregation. Had a chance to really get exposed. And one of my first mentors, when I was an intern at Bell Labs, and I told people this was a chemical engineer, and the engagement with this person, he had a PhD in solid state physics, undergraduate in chemical engineering, and I shared an office with him. And the everyday interaction of someone with a completely different background, came from a different place in the world than I did, helped open the world for me to understand a number of things. And the most important in chemical engineering was really, I call them the modern day alchemists. We learned how to transform one form of matter to another. And in essence, if you think about it, and you fast forward now 30 years, software and software programmers are now the new modern day alchemists. They're able to take intellectual property and ideas and transform them into products and services and solutions that actually enable enterprises, businesses, teachers, etc., to actually do things that they otherwise couldn't do. So it's kind of an interesting, call it migration or evolution of, physical transformation of matter to what we have now, which is an intellectual transfer of matter, which is, ones and zeros to actually create platforms of opportunity. So it's pretty interesting, and all sits in the same framework of being an alchemist. So it's pretty exciting.
It all comes full circle with sort of similar thought processes, right?
It does,
for
sure.
A great story around the importance of investing some time and energy into our interns, right? Mm-hmm. And building, helping interns really kind of learn alongside us as we go.
Critical, and taking the time, and it's important. And we have, I think InternX platforms. We have 14,000 HBCU students, STEM students, juniors and seniors. We've got over 650 training modules on this platform to help inform and train and teach these students so they can be, more effective interns, and honestly, more importantly, more effective professionals going forward. And, leveraging that power and leveraging networks. And any of your members interested in these interns, make sure you come to our internx.org website, sign up. We've got 170 corporate partners, but I think it is a fantastic way to bring talent into your organization.
That is great, and that is a very important thing for us to make sure our members do sign up for, because interns are also a valuable part of our workforce.
Absolutely, no question.
Deliver so much. In the past few years, I think we have just been wowed by what an incredible voice and advocate you have been for issues of financial inclusion and bridging the racial wealth divide. I wonder if you can share a little bit about what's driven you to become so passionate about this work, and sort of what was the spark that sort of launched these bigger conversations that you've really driven.
Yeah, like in like all things, Cathy, there are these moments of awareness. I live in the world of finance and technology, and they combine in this beautiful world of enterprise software, and then manifest for me in the world of Vista. And, as you said, we have 75 plus companies at any point in time, plus or minus. But, we engaged as a human community in facing the threat of this pandemic. And what became very clear, looking at some of our portfolio companies, is many of our customers were distressed. Some of those customers owned gyms, some of those customers owned restaurants, and they were literally shut down. They couldn't receive customers. So I, literally brought our CEOs together and said, okay, let's figure out how we can help our customers. And, it was interesting with Finastra in particular. We started to really analyze the communities that were being hit hardest, and it became very clear that a number of those communities actually don't have large branch banks supporting, call it the financial access to the businesses in those communities. And I think these statistics. Nearly 70% of Black neighborhoods don't have a branch bank at all. And when I start to reflect upon my childhood, 40 plus years ago, and remembering that in our neighborhood, which had, businesses that were African-American owned, et cetera, there were no banks. And in fact, my parents had to go across town to go to a bank, and ultimately a credit union, because they were teachers, that made all the difference in our family's ability to, to buy a house, to finance a car, and to do the things to move through the economic opportunity that is America. And that stark realization that these communities don't have banks, led me to have a number of conversations with our team at Finastra, my internal team, and we said, listen, here's what the challenge is. So, I had some relationships in Washington, that, as Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin and others, and I started making calls and saying, look, this is the problem, and how do we address this problem? And Kenneth Kelly, who was president of the National Bank Association, and had he and Donna Gumbrell and Bill Bynum, and really started literally having calls every day, and then every other day figuring out a plan to help the communities that they serve, the community that I come from. And we realized that the most effective way to actually drive capital and help these communities is going to be through what we term the capillary banking systems, the CDFIs and MDIs, because they actually know the customers. They're in the neighborhoods. They have the contact. They are actually the principal providers of economic capital into those communities. But we realized many of them didn't necessarily have the modernization capacity in their infrastructure, even though they had the wherewithal and the knowledge. And so that was, and then of course the capital. So that created a whole, in my mind, project that we now had to go handle. And the good news is, we've been able to get a number of allies, Inclusiv being one of those allies, to really work in, the federal government legislature, the executive branch, to, working with the technology providers, Finastra and Microsoft and others, to say, let's bring some real solutions here. Let's work as a team to make America a better and more inclusive place for access to capital. And while our work is nowhere near done, but I see, tremendous momentum from where we were a year and a half ago. And in fact, I'm seeing an acceleration of that momentum and real activities occurring in implementation. And that's what gives me some confidence and optimism that we're going to get this work done and get it done the right way.
It's so exciting to hear you talk about the capillary banking system. And really, I think as you describe, the last 18 months, where it's almost like the fissures in our banking system kind of cracked wide open, and it became so clear, what some have seen and felt for so long, which is, the larger kind of arterial banks simply cannot and don't and can't sometimes reach communities of color, lower income communities, and other communities that have just never had access. So many of our network members, so many of our community development credit unions actually organized the credit union out of either anti-redlining efforts in the 70s, or as the banks were consolidating in the 80s and 90s and moving branches out, they were organizing to keep those branches open, but then convert them into credit unions. And so, you're really, I think, it's really music to the ears of so many of our members. As you talk about that vision of the sort of capillary banking system, what are some of the reactions that you're hearing? And I know you did an incredible amount of work, both through the Business Roundtable and as you talk about the engagement that you did at all levels of the administration and Congress. What are some of the responses that you're hearing, and what might be helpful for folks on the ground to be thinking about as they try to explain the importance of what they're doing in their day-to-day work?
I think, Cathie, and I'm going to sum up, the most important thing that this community can do is raise their voice in unison to, Secretary Yellen, to Majority Leader Schumer, and say, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and say, hey, listen, here's what we need. We need to modernize this capillary banking system. Point number one, because if you think about it, modern banks are essentially technology companies, okay? And the capacity to lend, understand, monitor, maintain effective practices is going to be more and more tied to what is the state of your digital infrastructure. And you have to go through that upgrade. And once you've done that upgrade, you'll have massive lending capacity or massive lending ability in the communities. The second part of that, of course, is what we worked on, which is now get capacity, get dollars in the tier one, tier two, into our infrastructure, the capillary banking infrastructure, so that you now can lend effectively to the communities, to the businesses, to the people that need it. And so across the board, it's been interesting. When we did the study out of the Business Roundtable, a few things are clear. The larger banks do not view it as economic. As I say, the arterial banks do not view it as economic to actually provide physical infrastructure in the communities. They are often looking to provide proxy underwriting capacity using artificial intelligence, different forms of credit scoring, all that sort of, but they don't know the people. Okay, your organization knows the people, knows the businesses, and knows that business, if they had an extra 10,000 or 30,000, can expand their capacity by 3x. But if they don't have the capacity to get that loan, because maybe they're a cash run business or whatever it might be, but they have the ability to pay it back. Well, if you digitize the infrastructure of the bank, point one, digitize the infrastructure of the small business, you now have complete visibility and the ability to actually increase and enhance not only their credit, but their recovery on any of the loans that you make to those sort of businesses. So the digital infrastructure is critical. And it's critical to get, and we did an analysis with Microsoft and also with McKinsey, and so, for $524 million, we can modernize every CDFI and MDI in the United States. Okay, now you think about a $3.5 trillion infrastructure package, and we're talking less than, a little over $500 million. That modernization will create more economic impact than almost anything else, because we then will have increased the modality of opportunity in every community to drive real capital of the type that they need into those communities through your capillary banking system. And so that's the voice in unison that has to be sung and yelled to our folks in Congress and in the administration to say, this is why this is essential. You want an economic recovery? Recover the economy through our small to medium businesses, and do that by providing capital for them to expand and to grow their businesses. That's what's critical for us to do.
Well, those are some good marching orders for us, that's for sure. To be raising our voices in unison along with yours and others, to really be driving home the importance of that investment in the infrastructure. And it's interesting, in the conference, we'll be having a little bit later a panel that will talk about fintech. And, and so often people associate fintech with, the financial technology firms direct to consumers. But really what we're going to be zeroing in on is fintech solutions that can power institutions like ours, that can then have our time and our personnel more focused on what we do best, which is connecting with members, connecting with the community, and really designing, products that meet their needs.
Right. And there's two parts of the equation. There is the financial institution enablement, upgrade, modernization, and you create a natural extensibility into the upgrade of the technology of your small to medium businesses in terms of creating payment systems, ways for them to track and be more efficient in their working capital. And in doing so, you create visibility, you create the ability to actually have, guaranteed return of capital for, interest, loans, principals, all sorts of things. But it also helps them become better business owners. Just to give you an interesting statistic, we measure this across all of our companies every year, but for a small business implementing, software solutions, it's a 900% return on investment. 900%. There are no investments out there that give you that sort of return. So this could be scheduling or payroll software, whatever it might be. And so you as financial institutions can become the hub of economic development in your communities by modernizing yourselves and then providing extensible tools, which are available today to the community of lenders or the community of companies that you are lending to. So think about yourselves as the hub of an ecosystem as opposed to just a service provider. And that will liberate what I think are the right sort of activities to create that economic development in your particular ecosystem where your branch might be located.
Interesting, fabulous. And speaking of ecosystems, I know you recently launched something called the Southern Communities Initiative. And
Right.
I'd love to ask you to tell us a little bit about that, because as I understand it, that really is focused on building ecosystems.
Yeah, it's happy to share some thoughts on it. Out of the work that we did at the Business Roundtable, we really started to evaluate, okay, where are the critical needs and gaps in providing, think about, economic inclusivity. So you think about everything from wealth creation, education, housing, health equity, criminal justice, political representation, all those things. Now, I focused with Jamie Dimon on finance and how we're going to focus really on how do you drive, banking infrastructure into the communities. Like I said, it became clear that larger banks aren't economically interested in putting physical infrastructure there. So as we started to decouple this, I kind of pulled in a couple of pals, Rich Lesser, who runs BCG, and Dan Schulman, who runs PayPal, and said, let's really evaluate how this could work. And as we did work, my team and their teams, what we determined was the following: okay, why don't we look and figure out how we could create economic models at scale? And rather than pick one city, let's look at, 6. So we picked 6 cities in the South: Atlanta, Memphis, New Orleans, Birmingham, Houston, and Charlotte, and said, now let's look at these different layers. Okay, one of the most important, of course, is broadband, and I'll address that in a second. The second is, enablement of the CDFIs and MDIs. The third is, how do you bring capital into those communities? And said, so what we've done is we said, first of all, let's have an understanding of what the challenge is and how we're going to address each one of those layers and who are the right sort of partner organizations that we have. So in each one of those communities, we now have a overall partner organization. For instance, in Atlanta, it's the King Center. Bernice King, Dr. Bernice King runs that. And then we started bringing other partners, saying, how do we bring these layers of infrastructure to create these I'm going to call them, economic opportunity ecosystems. At the first level, we just ended up getting another $150 million grant from Cisco, and we're modernizing the entire infrastructure of every HBCU. And we're going to start in those 6 cities. Okay, when you modernize that infrastructure, you now have broadband. When you have broadband in those HBCUs in those communities, you now can make that extensible to the businesses. Okay, that now can participate. That modernization does a bunch of things. One is, as you know, one really important, it keeps them eligible for Title IV funding. So about $1 billion a year flows through those ecosystems. And if they don't have modern, cybersecurity protection, identification, all those sort of information, then they lose that funding. So now we have a way to solidify that basically in perpetuity. 2, we now have the ability to create that broadband infrastructure, which enables the next generation of opportunity for small and medium businesses. I'll just give one other example. We took the Grameen Foundation. Grameen, many of you all know from Muhammad Yunus and Bangladesh. There's a Grameen America. Partner them now with NAACP. We're going to start with 3 cities. And in essence, they have a system where we're now able to, create between 500 and 1,000 small businesses in those communities. And, I'm doing a matching grant with another, for instance, Regions Bank in Atlanta, and saying, okay, let's use that as one of the economic generating engines to support, this activity. So if you think about it as layering, in essence, partnerships, public-private partnerships, layering, capacity building, and infrastructure capability. And then now we're getting, corporate donations, the Walton Foundation, Kellogg Foundation, and others are saying, we like this because now we see, a systemic approach that creates an economic inclusive engine as opposed to a one-time grant. And so, for instance, Kellogg Foundation is working with us to say, okay, which of the CDFIs should we actually target in those 6 cities to do the modernization capacity first? So it's in a nutshell, kind of holistically how we're thinking about these 6 communities. And if you actually take those 6 communities, those 6 cities, 100-mile radius around each of those 6 cities, you touch 50% of the African-American population. So as we get those up and running, then that will be, call it the model that should be self-sustaining and a very efficient, upward of $100 billion of economic impact from just enabling these communities to be effective, having access to capital, access to broadband, and then you can start layering on the, access to education through, wellness through telemedicine. All those sorts of things are elements that lay on top, but you got to put those that basic infrastructure in first.
It's so timely, this initiative, and in so many ways, it's so aligned with so much of the work that we're doing. I think I had mentioned to you before we got started that we at Inclusiv, we run something called the Southern Equity Fund that invests secondary capital in, in community development credit unions, CDFI and MDI credit unions throughout the South. And we have a huge number, about 40% of all of our members are in that Southern region, but a lot of them are in those cities. And 2 things that are really interesting. One is many of our members have started forging partnerships with HBCUs around things like with their schools of social work to be able to have students who are trained in social work also become trained as financial counselors and coaches and small business trainers. So there's a really fabulous kind of alignment there. And of course, I have to always keep thinking about how perfect this timing is, given that, last year our network stepped up during the Paycheck Protection Program. And, when businesses in their communities were not being able to get access through the big banks, they came to the credit unions. Right. And many of our members had not even been SBA lenders until that time. They got on, they became SBA lenders, they got started, and they originated about $2 billion worth of PPP loans just last year. Right. And then again in PPP2, another, kind of equal, if not more amount. But now we're trying to figure out with them, where do we go from here with so many of these businesses that are now part of our membership, that are part of the credit union. There's a real need for them to get to the next level of financing. And certainly those are loans that credit unions, love to make and can make. but a lot of the businesses, during the PPP process, they needed some extra work. They needed to get sort of a lot of their own kind of books in order, a lot of their kind of
Right.
documentation together.
Right.
So
I'll tell you, Cathy, that's the wonderful thing, frankly, about technology and software in particular. One, as you know this, once you implement and modernize your banks and solutions, you typically can now process loans in half the time and do 3 times the volume, right? So that's point one. Point two, it actually trains your customers, because there's constructs in the software that says, here's what you actually have to do. It can teach and train them how to be more effective at bookkeeping, more effective at scheduling, more effective at managing everything from their payroll systems to ensuring that they're remaining compliant. And so that digital monetization, which is occurring everywhere on the planet, now has to be very much a part of the vocabulary and the narrative of your credit union groups. Okay, they have to digitize, modernize, and also view themselves as ecosystem hubs, because the more digitally enabled they make their customers, the more effective they're going to be as lenders to those customers. You now can start to evaluate quickly, what the working capital needs are of those businesses, and start to offer products and solutions and services to your customers. If you're in the dark about what they're doing because they're walking in with a stack of papers in a shoebox, then that's really hard to sort through. But if it's all digitized, and again, we've worked and built solutions in tandem with Finastra and Microsoft to help these small businesses, become a part of that, because that enablement is often, like I said, a 900% ROI for a small business who's using software. Enables them to be more effective. They become more effective at scheduling their customers, the payment plans, the payments from their customers, their cash flow. That is what you'll see is an entire economic uplift leveraging technology. So the first step was getting them capital during to survive at least the early stages of this pandemic. The next step is now, how do you digitally enable your entire ecosystem to be more effective at utilizing capital to grow their businesses, improve the employment prospects in their communities, in those small to medium businesses. And I think that's what we now need to take on as a challenge, is view yourselves as ecosystem hubs, not just a service provider episodically.
absolutely. Boy, sign us up. This is, this is exactly where we need to be. And as ecosystem hubs, it challenges all of us to rethink our business models away from just that service delivery, and as what's so lovely about community development credit unions is we are financial cooperatives. So that cooperative element, that empowerment element, that local ownership of assets element is part of our DNA. So I love it.
And I would tie into it, and I'll tell you one of the things we're doing, for instance, in the digital upgrade of the HBCUs, we made it a central part of the program that HBCU students will be interns who are part of that upgrade. So I would encourage all of you all to now, again, leverage intern networks, students who are juniors and seniors, STEM students. Again, they're digital natives. I'm a digital immigrant. I came to this in high school and later, and they have a perspective on how they engage with the world, which is very different than, people my generation engage with the world. Utilize that talent and that capability and that view on the world to help think about how you can actually provide services and solutions to the young entrepreneurs, businesses in your community that are going to be the backbone of the new economy. But if you don't have that view and you haven't embraced that, and I think interns are the best way to embrace it in my mind early on, because they're young, impressionable, and haven't learned bad habits, right? That's a good way. That's a good way to start to bring that sort of flow. I'll give you an example. It's really interesting. There's a bank that is a customer of ours in Indonesia, and I know the CEO quite well, and I've been and visited a couple of times. And 8 years ago, 9 years ago, they realized a digital revolution was coming. They had no digital services to speak of. And they also realized they had a talent problem. Where we're going to get these folks? Well, they embarked on a mission to retrain all of their people. And they almost now a completely digital bank. they've eclipsed the size of what was their biggest competitor in Singapore, and actually bought one of their biggest competitors, and have increased their market cap by, I think, over 30x over that period of time. And they didn't actually go through a massive influx of new people. They just retrained. They focused on educating and training their people, and they did that by implementing digital solutions that help teach and train how to become a more digital oriented bank. So it can be done. Wow. But you just have to show the leadership, and it created massive market cap value for them, an opportunity. And with your mission being one centered around the community, use this as an opportunity to upgrade the talent and skills and capability of your people, and then leverage that to do the same thing for the ecosystem of the businesses in your communities.
And I love the combination of bringing in the interns and the sort of the next generation, but also retraining those of us who need to upgrade our skills, who need to get up on that.
Yeah.
I know you are super busy, and I am so grateful for your time. I have one parting question, which is, give us a sense of, like, if all the different initiatives that you're kicking off right now, and all the work that you've been arguing, advocating for, and activating as an activist, sort of pushing for, if all of that is successful, what does 10 years from now look like?
Yeah. So, I have, again, a really unique purview because of the span and scope of Vista. We operate in 175 countries, and we see some, we're over 70 different industries. And so we see some highly digitized economies or industries, and then we see some that are, much, much further behind. The efficacy of fully digital solutions is, exponentially more productive to those economies. And I don't mean that just in terms of, more profit. What it actually improves the employment. Okay, highly digital economies in industries and companies often have 20-30% more employee capacity, higher wages, higher rates, better healthcare, because of the productivity that is now being experienced by utilizing, these digital platforms and solutions. It's just more efficient. So when I think about where we as Americans can be, and I look to, a friend of mine, Mukesh Ambani, who owns a company called Reliant and another company called Geo. They've digitized, in essence, the entire, call it, telecom system in India. 1.3 billion people now have access to 4G, 5G, right? Now he's got 400+ million on his platform. But I look at that, and we've got 45 million Americans who don't have access to broadband. Well, if one person, one company can digitize 1.3 billion, a country like America can digitize 42 additional Americans. Why is that important? Because, as you all know, it is a war on talent. We have to enable every citizen to participate in our economy. You've seen the reports. I mean, it's, $23 trillion of economic loss because we've got wealth and income and opportunity disparities in this country based on, some historical views of people. And we can no longer, stand and say that is okay. And we won't stand because the way the world is moving, we have to be competitive. So we, through these initiatives, have to bring the opportunity, access to opportunity to all Americans quickly and efficiently, in technology and and access to capital are the ways to do it. So that's the world that I'm driving towards. I think it is essential for long-term economic survival and, frankly, long-term economic happiness for us as Americans. Is we have to move forward and build, these sort of sustainable ecosystems and communities so that we all have an opportunity to live and thrive.
It's a great vision, and a very, very positive one we need in these somewhat, divisive times. So Robert, I want to thank you for your leadership, for your vision, for your and truly for your partnership in this work.
It is truly my pleasure and my honor to work alongside you and all of the members of Inclusiv. I think we're on the right mission, and let's just keep driving forward. Let's make our voices heard in unison about the importance of all the work that we do. So thank you all, and keep at it.
Thank you.